The steps for graphing cosine are the same as for graphing sine. I'm going to start by identifying my A, W, and D. Here, A is 3, meaning my amplitude or how far it's going to go up and down is 3. My W here is 4, and on this one I don't have to make it a fraction. There's no reciprocal multiplication here. And then my D, where my graph is going to move up and down to, is -1. And again, that's where I'm going to start my graph, is at -1. And that's going to be my new midline, the new x-axis, the new center of my graph. I know that since it's a cosine graph, it's going to start either at the top or the bottom. And since this one is a positive cosine graph, it's going to start at the top. And since A is 3, I know that it's going to start 3 above the midline. So since my midline is at -1, I'm going to count up 3. So 0 is 1, then 2, then 3 is going to put me at 2. And that's going to be the first point or the start of my cosine graph. And I know it's going to have to go down on each side. But then I needed to know what to move by. So I'm going to find my period. To find my period, I always take 2 pi and I divide it by W. So divide it by W. If it's not a fraction, don't reciprocate it. Just divide by W, which gives me a period of pi over 2. To find my interval, I'm going to take that period, pi over 2. I'm going to divide it by 4, or I'm going to times it by a fourth, which is going to give me an interval of pi over 8. And if I think about pi over 8 is in between 0 and pi over 4. So I'm going to have to go on the in-betweens here, in between each one and on the pi over 4s as well, counting by halves pretty much here. So I'm already up at the top of my graph. So the first time I move over, I have to move to the midline, and I have to move to the middle between 0 and pi over 4. So down to -1, in between 0 and pi over 4. Then when I move over to pi over 4, my next half, I'm going to go down 3. Since I moved up 3, I also have to go down 3. So 1, 2, 3 puts me at -4, and that's at pi over 4. Then in between pi over 4 and pi over 2, I'm going to be back to my midline. And finally at pi over 2, I'm going to be back at 2 at the maximum or the top of my graph. And now I can finish my first period of my cosine graph. Notice how my arrows are curved on either end, and I could continue on with the pattern to spread my graph out a little more if I choose to.